Spain, although officially non-belligerent, was the neutral country that intervened the most in the Second World War. Under the Blue Division, thousands of volunteers from the Falange and the Spanish army joined the Axis forces to fight against the communism of the Soviet Union. For 3 years, from 1941 to 1943, these brave soldiers carried out some of the most epic and heroic actions of the war. On June 22, 1941, the entire world was stunned when Adolf Hitler launched an aggressive invasion against Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union. The offensive, known as Operation Barbarossa, spanned an imposing front of 2,000 kilometers from the Arctic to the Black Sea. That same day in Madrid, Spain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ramón Serrano Suñer, presented a key proposal to the caudillo Francisco Franco: Spain's intervention in the fight against the Soviet Union through the deployment of a division of volunteers. Despite the official policy of neutrality, Franco's decision materialized quickly. After hours of deliberations and consultations with Adolf Hitler in Berlin, the Spanish leader approved his country's participation in the conflict. 2 days later, on June 24, 1941, Serrano Suñer, also president of the Spanish Falange and Franco's brother-in-law, delivered a fervent speech from the balcony of the General Secretariat of the movement on Madrid's Alcalá Street. In his address, he made a passionate call to citizens to join the cause of fighting communism. "This is not the time for long speeches, but for the Falange to deliver its sentence," he proclaimed amid cheers. He then strongly emphasized the connection between communist aggression and the evils that Spain had suffered. "Russia is guilty. Guilty of our civil war, guilty of the death of José Antonio and of so many comrades who fell in the conflict. The destruction of Russia is a historical mandate and a necessity for Europe." This fervent call mobilized thousands of people willing to enlist. Within hours, more than 600,000 volunteers showed up at recruitment offices, far exceeding the anticipated 20,000 men. However, Franco decided to limit the number to keep Spain's participation within controlled limits, aiming to avoid potential diplomatic tensions with both Berlin and London. The result was the formation of the Spanish Volunteer Division, known as the Blue Division, which would be sent to the Eastern Front in support of the Nazi army. The purpose behind the creation of this unit was clear: to demonstrate Spain's firm rejection of communism while simultaneously strengthening ties with the Axis powers without committing to large-scale participation that could upset the balance of power in Europe. Thus, the Blue Division became a symbol of the tacit alliance between Spain and Hitler's forces, without the country formally abandoning its stance of non-belligerence. On June 26, 1941, recruitment for the Blue Division began in Spain. Although there were already historical precedents of volunteering against Russia, this time the response was massive, with more candidates than expected. Among the volunteers, Falangists predominated, followed by military personnel, monarchists, Carlists, and other groups such as students, Catholics, and former political prisoners. Veterans of the Civil War, as well as some Russian and Portuguese exiles, also joined. The unit was symbolically supported by various sectors that wanted to fight communism. The emblem of the Blue Division combined elements of the Falange, the Iron Cross, and symbols of Spain. The creation of the Blue Division caused great concern in Great Britain, especially for Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who feared the unit could be a preparatory force for an invasion of Gibraltar. To counter this threat, the British took various measures, such as broadcasting messages in Spanish through BBC radio, warning that the volunteers would be used as cannon fodder by the Germans. Additionally, they paid large sums of money to 20 pro-British officers in the Spanish army in an attempt to sabotage recruitment, although they failed in their objective. 20 days after the start of the German invasion of the USSR, 19,000 volunteers from across the Iberian Peninsula and the Protectorate of Morocco were accepted to form the Blue Division, although 2,500 were rejected after medical examinations. Under the command of General Agustín Munoz Grandes, a veteran of the war in Africa, most of the recruits, primarily Falangist militiamen rather than professional soldiers, began their military training, receiving a salary of 7.5 pesetas per day. The farewell of the Spanish volunteers of the Blue Division became an event of great national significance. Tributes were held in major cities, and musical groups accompanied the soldiers at embarkation points, where they were seen off by their families. A notable example was the massive farewell at Atocha station in Madrid and Barcelona station. During their journey, the volunteers were cheered at train platforms throughout the Iberian Peninsula, receiving signs of support until they reached the Pyrenees. However, upon crossing the French border, the soldiers were met with some jeers in cities such as Hendaye, Bordeaux, Tours, Nancy and Strasbourg from certain French citizens and Spanish Republican exiles. The situation changed entirely upon reaching Germany, where upon crossing the border and arriving at German stations, they were welcomed with signs reading, "The German Army salutes the Spanish volunteers." The Blue Division, under the name of the 250th Spanish Division of the German Army, was integrated into the German forces, deploying between July 17th and July 23rd, 1941, at the Grafenwöhr military training grounds. First, the general headquarters and staff were established, responsible for key areas such as operations, intelligence, artillery, engineering, medical services, logistics, munitions, motor transport, and ecclesiastical affairs. Several regiments were then formed, including the 262nd, 263rd, and 269th Infantry Regiments, each with 3 battalions, and the 250th Artillery Regiment, with a total of 4 howitzer groups, which included batteries of 150 and 105 mm, as well as 37 mm cannons. The division's structure also comprised mobile reserve battalions, communications, sappers, anti-tank groups, reconnaissance units, medical services, transportation, logistics, gendarmerie and military mail, as well as ski and veterinary companies. A detachment of Spanish nurses, part of the women's section of the Phalange, was also included in the unit. Additionally, the division had a horse-drawn transport corps of 5,610 horses and a motorized fleet consisting of cars, motorcycles and trucks. To maintain morale, a weekly newspaper, Campaign Leaf, was created with a circulation of 18,000 copies, covering political news, culture, sports and entertainment, including photographs, crosswords and jokes. The Phalange also secured a spot on German radio, where the broadcaster Celia Jimenez Costera, linked to the women's section, became the godmother of the soldiers, offering programs that kept them connected to their homeland. The volunteers of the Blue Division were surprised by the advanced German facilities, especially when comparing their comfortable individual rooms to the overcrowded barracks in Spain. This contrast created a significant cultural clash between Germans and Spaniards. In the German army, officers and troops were treated more equally, whereas in the Spanish army, officers enjoyed special privileges and could impose physical punishments on soldiers, something that was immediately prohibited, although some commanders resisted the new regulations. Tensions also arose due to the differences in Spanish attitudes, as they often wore their tunics unbuttoned or kept their hands in their pockets, which annoyed the Germans, known for their discipline and neatness. Additionally, in their free time, Spanish soldiers exhibited a more relaxed attitude towards German women, leading to some romances, as Germany had a more open approach to sexual freedom compared to the strict religious morality prevailing among Spanish women. On July 31st, 1941, the Spanish soldiers of the Blue Division took a solemn oath of loyalty to both Adolf Hitler, as Commander-in-Chief of the German Army, and Francisco Franco, Caudillo of Spain. However, before this official ceremony, several Spanish officers had already been fighting alongside German forces on the Eastern Front. In the Battle of Uman, in Ukraine, a Spanish volunteer was the first to receive the Iron Cross for his bravery. Meanwhile, on August 1st, General Munoz Grandes met with Hitler to finalize the last details of Spain's participation in the war. Both ruled out the initial idea of sending the Blue Division to the Caucasus, instead deciding to deploy it to northern Russia. The Blue Division, Spanish heroes in the march to the Eastern Front. At the beginning of August 1941, the Blue Division left Grafenwöhr and began its journey towards the Eastern Front. Their initial route took them through Poland, passing through Suwałki, before embarking on 66 railway convoys towards Grodno in Lithuania. Upon arriving in Lithuanian territory, the unit experienced its first casualties when a bomb exploded in an attack carried out by a communist group. This act of hostility by the Slavs surprised the Spaniards, who during their journey encountered numerous bodies of hanged Poles and Jews. This was incomprehensible to them, as, according to the non-racial principles of the Phalange, they considered these minorities potential allies against Bolshevism. Despite the harsh images they witnessed, the Spanish soldiers befriended the Lithuanian police in cities like Lena and Vilna, and there were some encounters between officers of both nations. Later, the Blue Division continued its march towards Belarus, passing through towns such as Molodezno, Minsk, Borisov and Orsha, covering more than 900 kilometers on foot. However, instead of continuing towards Moscow, they changed their route to Leningrad, traveling by train from Dno to northern Russia along the Vitebsk route. During their journey, the Spaniards interacted with the local population and the Jews, who had a positive impression due to the respectful treatment they received. However, there were also certain conflicts, such as the one in Novosokolny, where a group of Spanish soldiers stole wooden planks from some houses to use them as firewood. On October 7, 1941, the Blue Division began arriving near Leningrad, establishing its position in the Novgorod area, a process that was completed on October 12th, coinciding with Hispanic Day and the Feast of the Virgin of the Pillar. The deployment of the units was organized as follows. The 269th Infantry Regiment was positioned along the western bank of the Volkhov River. The 262nd and 263rd Infantry Regiments occupied the island between the Great Volkhov and Small Volkhov rivers. The reconnaissance group was located near Lake Ilmen, while the 250th Artillery Regiment, the anti-tank group, and the sapper and reserve battalions remained in the rear. The first engagement of the Blue Division officially took place on October 12th, when the 2nd Battalion of the 269th Regiment intercepted a detachment of the Red Guard near Capella. In an effective ambush, the Soviets suffered a crushing defeat with 130 casualties, including 50 dead and 80 prisoners. In the following days, between October 18th and 20th, the Spaniards launched an offensive that allowed them to take several Soviet villages, including Rusa, Sitno, Tigoda, Dubrovka, Nitlikino, and Tigada. However, in their advance towards the villages of Smysko and Muraveskai, the Blue Division had to retreat due to flank and rear attacks, suffering their first casualties due to Soviet counterattacks. On October 21st, the Blue Division's front line stabilized just before receiving the visit of General José Moscardo, a recognized hero of the Civil War for his defense of the Alcázar of Toledo in 1936. Moscardo inspected the front line and gave words of encouragement to the troops, strengthening the unit's spirit. The first battle in which the Blue Division participated took place in the Posad sector, a wooded area 12 kilometers from the Volkhov River and the Otensky Monastery. On November 8, 1941, the Spanish volunteers took defensive positions to repel a fierce counter-offensive by the Red Army, which was preceded by intense artillery and air bombardments. The next day, November 9th, the soldiers of the Blue Division found themselves surrounded by an encircling attack, advancing through the forests towards Shevelevo. Despite the adversity, the Spaniards bravely resisted, singing hymns such as the Legionnaire's Song, the infantry anthem Oriamendi and Cara al Sol. A particularly heroic moment occurred when the 1st Company of the 269th Infantry Regiment, composed of university students from Madrid's SEU, fiercely defended their positions. The company, which had suffered heavy losses, barely counted 187 men, 7 officers, and 180 soldiers, among whom was the poet Dionisio Ridruejo Jimenez, who would later receive the Iron Cross. The company would have been destroyed had it not been for the relief of the German troops on November 17th. As the Battle of Moscow progressed, the Red Army launched a counter-offensive on December 7, 1941, coinciding with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In response, the Blue Division withdrew to the eastern bank of the Volkhov River, where they spent the winter. By that time, the Spanish volunteers had suffered 368 casualties, with 109 dead and 259 wounded. This toll, combined with global events, led the Spanish Army's command to foresee that the struggle on the Eastern Front would be long. Despite the difficulties, General Agustin Munoz Grandes conveyed to his men, "Nailed to the ground, not a step back." Following this order, the Spaniards prevented the Soviets from advancing even a single meter in the sector between Udanik and Gorka. On December 25, 1941, Christmas Day, the Red Army managed to seize the intermediate position located between Chutany and the Alcázar position, a key area for the Spanish garrison. During this assault, Soviet troops took several Spanish soldiers prisoner, whom they later murdered and nailed to the frozen ground with pickaxes. However, on the night of December 26th to 27th, a group of Spanish volunteers from Mudarnik launched a counterattack and recaptured the position. The sight of their fallen comrades horrified the soldiers, who, knowing what awaited them if they were captured, repelled all enemy attacks. Armed with machine guns, they killed 1,080 Soviet soldiers, forcing the survivors to retreat in defeat. The winter of 1941 to 1942 was the harshest for the Blue Division, facing temperatures that dropped below -30 degrees Celsius, which caused many weapons to jam and left 103 soldiers hospitalized due to frostbite. To mitigate the effects of the extreme cold, the Spanish army had anticipated this situation by sending more than 18,000 coats and a Christmas bonus for the troops, which included balaclavas found in the depots of the international brigades from the Civil War, curiously manufactured in the Soviet Union itself. On January 7, 1942, the Red Army launched an offensive between Novgorod and Lake Ilmen, leaving a German garrison of 600 men completely surrounded in Posad. Since the Blue Division was the closest unit, it was decided to mobilize the ski company, consisting of 206 fighters and 70 sleds, under the command of Lieutenant Otero Ars, to rescue the German soldiers. At 6 o'clock on January 10th, they set out for their objective, crossing Lake Ilmen and avoiding its cracks on the frozen surface, all under temperatures of -50 degrees Celsius and a constant snowstorm. The journey lasted approximately 24 hours, and on January 11th, the skiers reached the village of Ustrika, where they took shelter, although the harsh trek claimed the lives of 102 of the 206 fighters due to frostbite. The next day, January 12th, the survivors joined a group of 40 Latvian volunteers, and together they attacked the outer perimeter of Posad. The Germans, upon seeing a flare fired by the Spaniards, also joined the assault from within the siege. The battle lasted for a week until January 21st, when the Red Army lifted the siege and retreated in defeat. In the end, of the 200 Spaniards who initially took part in the operation, 188 suffered casualties due to death, wounds, or frostbite. Only 12 skiers and 5 Latvians emerged unscathed from this arduous mission. At the beginning of 1942, the casualties suffered by the Blue Division were considerable, but there was still a significant number of volunteers willing to join. Given this continued demand, Franco approved the creation of a new Spanish unit, the 2nd Infantry Division Khaki, in contrast to the blue that identified the Phalange. This new unit would be composed solely of professional military personnel. General Enrique Varela was tasked with organizing recruitment, opening enlistment centers in cities such as Zaragoza, San Sebastian, Valladolid, Guadalajara, Logroño, and Calatayud, where 16,502 new troops enlisted. These soldiers were sent to the Auerbach training grounds and the barracks in Hof for their training. However, as casualties on the Eastern Front continued to rise, reaching 9,000, the 2nd Infantry Division Khaki was eventually integrated into the Blue Division to replace the losses suffered by the original unit. On February 10, 1942, a new Red Army offensive struck the defensive line of the Blue Division on the banks of the Volkhov River. The first confrontation took place in Malsamoshe and Bolsamache, where Soviet forces directly clashed with the 2nd Battalion of the 262nd Infantry Regiment. Later, on March 2nd, another attack occurred in Krutik against the 250th Mobile Reserve Battalion. To the surprise of many, the Spanish soldiers not only resisted the onslaught, but managed to advance along the Novgorod-Chudovo road, achieving on February 19th a strategic maneuver by linking up with collaborationist units from Latvia and the Netherlands, specifically the Latvian Legion and the Dutch Legion. This action encircled a large number of Soviet troops, trapping them in what became known as the Volkhov Pocket. Despite Soviet efforts to break the encirclement, the Spaniards held their position, enduring a siege in extreme conditions of melting snow and mosquito-infested swamps. Finally, on June 28, 1942, the encircled Soviet forces were completely annihilated. This success earned General Munoz the Knight's Cross and public praise from Hitler, who recognized the bravery of the Spanish volunteers. Meanwhile, on the home front on August 15, 1942, a serious incident occurred when several veterans of the Blue Division returned to Spain. José Domínguez Munoz, a divisionary accompanied by a group of radical Falangists, stormed the sanctuary of Begoña in Bilbao during a mass, where members of the Carlist party and some military personnel, including General Enrique Varela, were present. During the protest, Domínguez threw a grenade that left several wounded. This act, known as the Begoña attack, forced Franco to take drastic measures. On September 1st, Domínguez was executed by firing squad, and to prevent further conflicts, Franco granted more power to the military within the Blue Division, reducing the influence of the Falange. Outside the Eastern Front, the volunteers of the Blue Division enjoyed several leaves during which they could take advantage of the tourist facilities in Axis-controlled territories. To manage these opportunities, the Rear Services Headquarters was established, with offices in cities such as Tallinn, Estonia, Riga, Latvia, Vilnius, Lithuania, Königsberg, Prussia, Hof, Germany, and Paris, France. The volunteers benefited from free rail transport and accommodation at no cost, which allowed them to travel to places such as Ukraine, Austria, Italy, Norway, and France. However, this mobility sometimes caused problems with the authorities, including bar fights or disputes related to women, leading the Spanish government to deploy armed agents of the Civil Guard throughout Europe, from the Arctic regions of Russia to the Mediterranean coasts. This was the largest deployment of this security force in its history. The German army regarded the Spaniards as some of the finest soldiers fighting in the war. During World War II, a phrase became popular among the Germans. If you find a soldier poorly shaved, with broken boots and an unbuttoned jacket, salute him. He is a hero, he is Spanish. This recognition was not unfounded, as the Spaniards received numerous decorations. A notable example was General Munoz, who was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaves. Of the 881 medals of this type awarded to German soldiers, only 8 were granted to foreigners: 4 Romanians, 2 Japanese, 1 Finn, and 1 Spaniard. Despite Spain remaining neutral, its name appeared on the list, while countries like Italy or Hungary, which actively participated in the conflict, received none. The Blue Division, the heroic siege of Leningrad. In 1942, the Blue Division was sent to Leningrad, a key location marked by the history of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. The unit's destination was the Veriza sector, between Alexandrovka and Lake Izhora, where it was deployed as the largest force of Army Group North. There, the Spanish soldiers took part in a static siege battle, with snipers and the artillery pieces of the 250th Artillery Regiment playing a crucial role in locating and destroying enemy batteries. Additionally, the medical personnel, including nurses, displayed remarkable bravery by setting up a field hospital with 2,000 beds for the wounded, while other medical teams attended to soldiers at various rear positions, such as Porzhov, Riga, Vilna, Königsberg, and Hof. On January 22, 1943, at 9:45 hours, the Red Army launched a fierce attack on the sector between Emga and Sin-Vavino, defended by 550 soldiers of the 269th Infantry Regiment of the Blue Division. These soldiers had just been transported in 20 trucks to the Sin-Vavino heights. The Soviet attack was so intense, cutting through the Posolok forest, that the Spanish suffered many casualties and were forced to retreat from Emga. However, at 0000 hours on January 24th, after enduring 48 hours without rest and temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius, the Spanish volunteers launched a devastating counterattack. They recaptured Emga and the Sin-Vavino heights and advanced several kilometers into enemy territory, inflicting heavy losses on the Soviet forces. At the end of the Battle of Sin-Vavino, the Spanish counted 401 casualties, including 124 dead, 6 officers and 118 soldiers, 211 wounded, 13 officers and 198 soldiers, and 66 frozen or missing, 2 officers and 64 soldiers. In contrast, the Soviet forces suffered more than 1,000 casualties. The Battle of Krasny Bor, the epic resistance of the Blue Division, known as Operation Polar Star, General Georgy Zhukov attempted to replicate the tactics of the Battle of Stalingrad in the sector defended by Army Group North, attacking the area between the Leningrad and Moscow railway, specifically at Krasny Bor, which at that time was under the protection of the Blue Division. The Spanish unit, composed of 5,600 soldiers and 84 cannons, organized its forces as follows. On the front line were the 262nd, 263rd, and 269th Infantry Regiments, the 250th Reconnaissance Group, the 250th Reserve Battalion, and the 250th Ski Company. In the rear, the 250th Anti-Tank Group, equipped with 3 75mm cannons, was positioned, while in the city of Rykolvo, the General Staff was led by General Emilio Esteban-Infantes. At 6:45 hours on February 10, 1943, the Red Army launched its offensive against the Blue Division in Krasny Bor, intensely bombarding the Spanish positions with more than 1,000 cannons. Subsequently, 44,000 Soviet soldiers, supported by 117 tanks of the T-34, KV-1, and T-26 models, launched their attack. Although the Soviets had a clear numerical superiority, they made several decisive strategic mistakes. Among these, the infantry advanced in tight formations, making the soldiers easy targets for the Spanish MG-34 machine guns. Additionally, many Soviet soldiers had consumed vodka the previous night, leaving them drunk or hungover during the attack. The Spanish divisionaries took advantage of these weaknesses and, upon opening fire, decimated the Soviet columns, killing hundreds of soldiers and piling up corpses in the snow. Another advantage for the Spaniards was that the Russian tanks advanced too far ahead of the infantry, making them vulnerable, especially when many became stuck in the craters created by previous bombings. The Spanish anti-tank cannons and Molotov cocktails destroyed dozens of tanks. Despite these failures, the Soviets managed to break through the Spanish line and penetrated the first defensive line, causing heavy casualties among the divisionaries. The 2nd Battalion of the 262nd Infantry Regiment and the 250th Reserve Battalion were practically annihilated, and the 7th Company suffered a partial retreat. The 250th Ski Company was unable to recover the lost ground, while the 3rd and 5th Companies managed to hold the trenches and preserve the railway connecting Leningrad with Moscow. With the first line broken, the Blue Division was forced to retreat 3 to 4 kilometers to the city of Krasny Bor. The Soviets quickly invaded the city, and fierce street-by-street combat broke out. The Spaniards resisted tenaciously, and although German aerial bombardments with Stuka planes attempted to assist, the soldiers of the 250th Anti-Tank Group and the 250th Engineer Battalion were on the brink of destruction. Despite these difficulties, the Spaniards held out for hours, even engaging in hand-to-hand combat with bayonets. Finally, German reinforcements arrived in the form of the 390th German Regiment, the 659th Estonian Battalion, the Lithuanian Legion, and the Flemish Legion, composed of Belgian volunteers. Faced with the overwhelming wave of new reinforcements and a Spanish counterattack, the Soviet troops were forced to retreat towards the Izhora River on the night of February 10th to 11th, leaving behind a significant defeat. The Battle of Krasny Bor stands as one of the most significant victories of the Spanish army in the 20th century, though at such a high cost that even the BBC of London went so far as to claim that the Blue Division had been completely annihilated. However, this claim was far from true, as despite the 2,800 casualties suffered by the Spaniards, including 1,125 dead, 1,500 wounded and 200 prisoners, the Soviet forces endured even greater losses, exceeding 10,000 casualties among the dead, wounded, and captured. The determination and courage of the Spanish soldiers were so remarkable that they managed to frustrate Operation Polar Star, prevented a disaster similar to Stalingrad for Army Group North, and most importantly, engraved one of the most outstanding feats in the military history of Spain. Returned to Spain, the feat of the Blue Division returns home. After the heavy casualties suffered in the Battle of Krasny Bor, the Blue Division was once again deployed in the siege of Leningrad, where it was responsible for a prolonged siege in the Pushkin sector. an operation that lasted until the summer of 1943 and resulted in an average of 300 casualties per month. During this time, a total of 7,497 new volunteers arrived from Spain, including 10% of veterans who decided to rejoin the fight. One of the most notable changes in the Blue Division was that the majority of the new recruits were professional military personnel, while the White Russians who had served in the Spanish ranks were transferred to the Russian Liberation Army, commanded by General Andrei Vlasov, who fought alongside the Axis, thanks to the efforts of Officer Grigory Lansdorf. The German army, recognizing the importance of the Spanish unit, decided to modernize its equipment, providing it with 75mm PK cannons and MG-42 machine guns, and additionally created an exclusive decoration for the Spanish volunteers, the commemorative Medal for Spanish Volunteers in the Fight against Bolschewism, Erinnerungsmedaille für die spanischen Freiwilligen im Kampf gegen den Bolschewismus. As the Axis's military setbacks multiplied during the Second World War, Great Britain and the United States, through their ambassadors in Madrid, Samuel Hoare and Carlson Hayes, exerted pressure on the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, Francisco Gómez Jordana, to stop Spain from supplying tungsten to Germany, declare its neutrality instead of maintaining the stance of non-belligerence, and withdraw the Blue Division from the Eastern Front. However, Franco did not want to risk the Germans forcibly keeping the Spanish volunteers, as had happened with a Spanish unit in Denmark during the Napoleonic Wars. Therefore, he decided to negotiate an agreement that would be acceptable to both the Third Reich and the Allies. Thus, the Spanish government authorized the withdrawal of the Blue Division in exchange for continuing to sell tungsten to Germany and sending a small unit to Russia under the name of the Blue Legion. On the 1st of October of 1943, the Blue Division was officially withdrawn from Leningrad, and on the 12th of October, it was stationed in Oranienbaum, where it received an emotional military tribute. General Emilio Esteban-Infantes was decorated with the Knight's Cross by Hitler in a formal ceremony. Subsequently, the volunteers departed for Spain in railway convoys, being received as heroes in every city and town they passed through. In Zaragoza, a massive mass was held in the Basilica of the Virgin of the Pillar in honor of their return. Blue Legion, the heroes who remained on the Eastern Front. About 2,000 volunteers decided to stay on the Eastern Front, forming the Blue Legion, which was created on November 19, 1943, under the command of Colonel Antonio Garcia Navarro in Kingisepp, a small town near the border between Russia and Estonia. Although it was not officially recognized in the army records, as it was a completely volunteer unit, its structure was inspired by the Spanish Foreign Legion with the formation of the 1st and 2nd Infantry banners and a 3rd mixed banner. On December 1st, 1943, the Blue Legion experienced its first combat on the Eastern Front, facing communist partisans and armed civilians in the Kingisepp region. Just 2 weeks after this baptism of fire, on December 15th, the Red Army launched a massive offensive against Army Group North, forcing the members of the Blue Legion to retreat at the beginning of 1944. During their withdrawal, they fought in Lyuban, Luga, Pskov, and Narva before reaching the city of Tallinn in Estonia, where they took refuge. With the Eastern Front in a critical phase of the war, Franco ordered the definitive withdrawal of the Blue Legion from Russia on March 11, 1944. The Third Reich raised no objections, and on March 31st, the volunteers were enthusiastically bid farewell at the barracks of Stablek in East Prussia. However, Colonel Antonio Garcia Navarro took the opportunity to express in his speech his dissatisfaction with the Spanish government for allowing the withdrawal of the Spaniards before completing the crusade against Bolshevism. By mid-1944, Spain officially declared its neutrality and prohibited any kind of voluntary participation in the war. Nevertheless, the Falange, acting in secret, continued to support the creation of various Spanish units. Among them, the Phantom Battalion of the Pyrenees stood out, fighting against the French resistance, as well as the inclusion of Spaniards in the 24th SS Mountain Division, Karstjager, which fought in the Balkans against Josip Tito's regime in Yugoslavia. Other formations also emerged, such as the Spanish SS Esquerra unit, led by Commander Miguel Esquerra, which fought against the United States Army in the Battle of the Ardennes in 1944 and against Soviet forces in the Battle of Berlin in 1945. Post-war, the last echoes of a nation forged in war. The Blue Division consisted of around 45,245 men from the Spanish Army, among whom were 2 generals, 2,372 officers, 4,290 non-commissioned officers, and 38,685 soldiers. Of these, 21,289 suffered casualties, including 5,000 dead, approximately 11% of the total, 8,000 wounded, 7,800 sick, and 489 prisoners. Regarding the 489 prisoners captured by the Soviet Army, most were sent to the gulags in Siberia, where they endured extreme cold and mistreatment. 130 Spaniards died in captivity, while only 8 gained freedom after converting to communism and obtaining Soviet citizenship. Even those 70 Spaniards who enlisted in the Blue Division with the intention of deserting to the Red Army were not forgiven. After the death of Joseph Stalin in 1953, Spain began negotiations with the Soviet Union for the release of the Blue Division prisoners. In 1954, the request was addressed, and a Greek ship called Semiramis was assigned for the transport of the prisoners. On board were 229 veterans of the Blue Division, along with 19 deserters, 19 merchant sailors, 15 aviation students from the Second Republic, and 4 orphans of the Spanish Civil War. The journey began in the port of Odessa, crossing the Black Sea before making a stop in Turkey, where they met with the Spanish delegation in Istanbul. They then continued their journey through the Mediterranean Sea to reach the Iberian Peninsula. On April 2, 1954, Semiramis docked in the port of Barcelona, where the former prisoners were welcomed by General Agustin Munoz Grandes and Raimundo Fernandez Cuesta, Secretary General of the movement. After a mass at the Basilica of La Merced, the freedmen returned to their homes. The Blue Division stood out as one of the most professional and decorated units of the Second World War. Among its achievements were 150 first-class Iron Crosses, 2,500 second-class Iron Crosses, 2 Knight's Crosses for Generals Agustin Munoz Grandes and Emilio Esteban-Infantes, and 3 German Gold Crosses. On Spain's part, 8 Laureate Crosses of St. Ferdinand were awarded to the divisionaries Jaime Galeana Garmila, José Pérez Castro, Generoso Ramos, Vázquez, José Rubio Moscoso, Salvador Masip Bendicho, Antonio Ponte Anido, Manuel Ruiz de Huidobro Alzurena, and Teodoro Palacios Cueto, 54 individual military medals and 2 collective military medals to the 2nd Battalion of the 269th Infantry Regiment and the 250th Ski Company. There were also additional awards such as the Medal for the Sufferings of the Homeland, the Mutilated Medal, the Wounded Badge, the Infantry Assault Emblem, the General Assault Emblem, the Close Combat Combatants Bars, the Tank Destruction Badge, the German Cross, the Winter Medal, and the Cross of Merit. In the Almudena Cemetery in Madrid rests the Unknown Soldier, a tribute to all those who were found unidentifiable in Russia, becoming a symbol of the Blue Division. After the fall of Francois in 1975 and the establishment of the Kingdom of Spain under the leadership of Juan Carlos III in 1978, the Blue Division continued to be a recurring topic in literature, with numerous books, articles, and films dedicated to its legacy. Monuments were also erected in its honor, such as in the Almudena Cemetery in Madrid and the Pankovka Cemetery in Russia. Over the years, numerous associations emerged, and a Blue Division museum was established in Madrid. As for the veterans, some of them participated in later events such as the coup d'etat of February 23, 1981, joining the rebel forces, including generals like Milans del Bosch, Alfonso Armada, and Aramburu Topete. One of the most symbolic moments for the veterans of the Blue Division occurred on the 60th anniversary of the victory over Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg, in 2005, when they met in a parade with Soviet veterans from the Battle of Krasny Bor. Despite having been enemies on the battlefield, the veterans shared gestures of respect and camaraderie, exchanging gifts like a damask Toledo painting of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Recognized not only by Germany and Spain, but also by nations such as the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union itself, the Blue Division earned respect for its bravery and conduct during the war. Especially for their heroism in the Battle of Krasny Bor, the divisionaries were praised for not committing war crimes against the civilian population, and in some cases they even helped communities oppressed by the Third Reich. This conduct further contributed to enhancing the prestige of the Spanish volunteers, cementing the Blue Division's legacy as one of the most heroic episodes in Spain's military history. Agustín Muñoz Grandes, the commander of the Blue Division. Agustín Muñoz Grandes, commander of the Blue Division, had the opportunity to meet personally with Adolf Hitler during his service in World War II. He was born in the neighborhood of Carabanchel Bajo in Madrid, into a humble family without military background. From a young age in 1910, he entered the Infantry Academy of Toledo, which was then headed by Colonel José Villalba Riquelme. After graduating in 1915 as a lieutenant, he was assigned to the Moroccan front, where he took command of a unit of regulars, standing out for his good performance and receiving several decorations in combat. In 1925, he was seriously wounded in the Battle of Alhucemas when he was hit in the chest. Despite his injuries, his career continued to rise, and in 1926, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel due to his war merits. His return to the peninsula in 1926 showed him as a man with liberal and republican tendencies, which contrasted with the political orientation he would later take, reflecting a mood of discontent within the Spanish officer corps that distanced itself from the government due to its reforms in the army. In 1931, with the proclamation of the Republic, Muñoz Grandes was appointed by José Valdivia as second-in-command of the Assault Guard, an organization created by the new Republican government to defend its interests. His experience in organizing troops in Morocco was crucial for his appointment. In 1934, during the Asturias Revolution, he participated in the repression of the mining revolts. Despite his initial stance, not aligning with right-wing governments when the Popular Front won the elections in 1936, Muñoz Grandes, already a colonel in Madrid, began to conspire with the Spanish Military Union under the direction of General Mola. After the military uprising of July 18, 1936, he was arrested and taken to the Modelo prison in Madrid, where he was detained along with other prominent right-wing figures such as Ramón Serrano Suñer, Ricardo Zamora, and other Falangist leaders. In prison, Muñoz Grandes came close to being executed. In a first attempt at execution, he was saved by the General Director of Security, Alonso Malol, and later by the anarchist Melchor Rodríguez García, who, as the Director of Prisons, prevented the assault on the prison during a bombing. Rodríguez García, by negotiating with the militiamen, managed to avoid the attack, thus protecting the lives of right-wing prisoners, including Muñoz Grandes, and keeping the violence at bay. In March of 1937, after reaching the National Zone, Agustín Muñoz Grandes joined the active service and was assigned to replace Colonel Cayuela in command of one of the Navarrese brigades, one of the most combative units of the rebel forces. At the head of his unit, he played a key role in the northern offensive. During the Santander campaign in Asturias, he jointly led the 2nd and 3rd Navarrese brigades, and, after fighting a tough battle under unfavorable conditions, he managed to break the enemy line at Campo de Caso, an action that probably earned him the promotion to the rank of general. Muñoz Grandes continued his career in command of the 61st Division of the 2nd Army Corps, participating in the fierce Battle of Teruel, one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War. Later, when Franco reorganized the forces for the final offensive, he was appointed head of the Urgell Army Corps, with which he participated in the conquest of Catalonia. At the end of the war, Muñoz Grandes was appointed as the first Minister Secretary General of the movement, replacing Raimundo Fernández Cuesta. Despite not being a monarchist, traditionalist, or Falangist, but rather a centrist Republican, his appointment was a surprise. He also held the position of military governor of the Campo de Gibraltar. With the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Franco entrusted him with directing the unit of Spanish volunteers, the Blue Division. Muñoz Grandes had a strategic advantage, his prior knowledge of the Germans and his connections with some Wehrmacht officers. In fact, he had been a tactical advisor to Wilhelm Canaris, responsible for German army intelligence, and organized the Reich's assistance to Franco. Moreover, he was a close friend of Hitler, who consulted him about Operation Felix, the invasion of Gibraltar. On July 31, 1941, at the Grafenwöhr training field, Munoz Grandes delivered an emotional speech to the Spanish volunteers enrolled in the 250th Division of the Wehrmacht on the same day they swore loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause. Spanish volunteers, soldiers of honor of our homeland. Today, in one of the happiest moments of our lives, before the glorious flags of Germany and Spain, you have sworn to die before the Bolshevik barbarism continues its work of hatred and destruction that stained our homeland and now threatens to impose it on all of Europe. After 5 weeks of training, the Blue Division was deployed in the Novgorod sector, integrating into the 25th German Army with around 18,000 men, composed mainly of Falangists, volunteers, replacement soldiers, and professional commanders. In September of 1941, Agustin Munoz Grandes had an interview with Adolf Hitler at the headquarters of his general staff in Rastenburg, known as the Wolf's Lair. Hitler, disillusioned by the lack of enthusiasm from Franco and his brother-in-law Ramon Serrano Suña, expected Munoz Grandes to more actively join the German cause. During that visit, Munoz Grandes was decorated by Hitler with the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in March of 1942, and then, in December of that same year, he was awarded the Oak Leaves, an exceptionally rare recognition given to a non-German. However, in a report from Ribbentrop, dated August 31, 1942, Munoz Grandes' discontent is noted regarding the lack of ideology among the new soldiers joining the division, who were no longer mostly Falangists. According to sources close to the matter, during that meeting, Munoz Grandes expressed his willingness to remain in command of the Blue Division if Hitler considered it appropriate, but also made it clear that his goal was to return to Spain with Germany's support in order to carry out, together with Falange, a political purge, excluding those who did not fit his vision of a new order. To achieve this, it would not be necessary to displace Franco, but simply relegate him to an honorary position, making him the head of state while he assumed the role of prime minister. This plan would have been supported by the strategic importance of the Blue Division in the Battle of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, where it is said that Hitler frequently commented to General Alfred Jodl, "We must increase the popularity of General Munoz Grandes, for the Blue Division may be crucial when it comes to bringing down this regime controlled by priests." In 1943, Munoz Grandes returned to Spain after being relieved of command of the Blue Division and replaced by General Esteban-Infantes. He was promoted to lieutenant general and appointed head of Franco's military house. However, this promotion meant the loss of his command over the troops, which some interpreted as a maneuver by Franco to neutralize a potential rival identified with the Nazi cause. In 1945, Munoz Grandes was appointed Captain General of the 1st Military Region. In 1951, after the formation of Franco's 8th government, which included the new Concordat with the Vatican and agreements with the United States, Munoz Grandes took on the role of Minister of the Army. Later, he reached the rank of Captain General, a title that had been reserved until then for Franco, becoming the 52nd person to hold this position since its creation by King Carlos III. Agustin Munoz Grandes held the position of Chief of the High General Staff until July of 1962, when he was promoted to Vice President of the government, a position that would later be held by Carrero Blanco. In the Francois dictatorship, Spain needed an alliance with the United States, the main world power of the time, and the only one willing to strengthen ties with the regime. Munoz Grandes was assigned one of the most complex tasks both militarily and diplomatically, negotiating agreements with the Americans. It was not an easy task, as the cession of bases to an Anglo-Saxon power brought back memories of Gibraltar. However, he had to recognize that Spain needed resources and international support, and that these bases were essential in the context of the Cold War and the confrontation with the Soviet Union, a power that Spain had already previously faced. In 1967, after the approval of the succession law and due to the anti-monarchist stance of the Captain General, who did not consider Don Juan de Borbón to be Spanish, Agustin Munoz Grandes was removed from his position as Vice President of the government, although he continued to perform all his military duties. On July 11, 1970, he passed away due to gastrointestinal complications related to kidney cancer. Emilio Esteban-Infantes, the general who replaced Munoz Grandes. Emilio Esteban-Infantes y Martín was born in Toledo on the 18th of May, 1892, into a family with no military background. From a young age, he showed a strong calling for the military career, which led him to join the Infantry Academy of Toledo in 1907, under the direction of Colonel Juan San Pedro y Chea. In this institution, he began to forge his career, which would lead him to play crucial roles during the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War, standing out in the Blue Division as one of the most prominent commanders in charge of Spanish forces in Russia. In his early years in the army, Esteban-Infantes demonstrated a strong commitment and great strategic skill. He served in the Spanish Protectorate of Morocco, where he was under the command of General Sanjurjo, participating in various operations and battles in Melilla and Alhucemas. Over time, his career developed rapidly, being promoted to captain at the age of 20, and due to his performance in combat, to lieutenant colonel in a short period of time. It was in 1925 when he actively participated in the Alhucemas landing, one of the most emblematic actions of the war in Morocco, which solidified his reputation as a competent military leader. The military rebellion of 1936 caught him in Madrid, but he quickly aligned himself with the rebels, joining the Francois side in Burgos. In the early months of the conflict, he took on important responsibilities, including the command of the General Staff of the Army Corps of Castilla. Throughout the war, Esteban-Infantes stood out for his leadership on various fronts, especially in the offensives of Somosierra and Navafría, as well as in the capture of key positions like the I Brigade of the Soria Division and the 3 Brigade of Jarama. During the Battle of Teruel, he was tasked with leading the 81st Division, participating in the occupation of the Javalambra mountain range, and received the Military Medal for his performance. Esteban-Infante was one of the military leaders who stood out in organizing and leading the Francois forces during the war, often acting as chief of staff in various regions and decisive battles. His ability to command under adverse conditions and his success in coordinating units earned him the respect of his superiors and consolidated him as one of the main generals of the rebel side. After the end of the Spanish Civil War, Esteban-Infantes continued his career in the army, rising to the rank of Brigadier General in 1940. Despite his promotion, he remained a man who did not hide his ambition to continue proving his worth internationally, especially in the context of the Second World War. It was during this period that he persistently requested to be sent to Russia to lead the Spanish troops in the fight against communism, a request that was eventually granted. In December of 1942, he succeeded General Agustín Munoz Grandes in command of the Blue Division, a unit that had been sent to fight alongside the Third Reich on the Eastern Front. Under his leadership, the Blue Division stood out in the Battle of Krasny Bor, where it managed to withstand intense attacks from the Red Army, despite being outnumbered and facing enemy tanks. This victory was not only crucial for the defense of the siege of Leningrad, but also solidified Esteban-Infantes as one of the most capable and admired commanders by the Germans. For his bravery and success on the battlefield, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, one of the most prestigious decorations awarded by the Third Reich, and also the German Cross in Gold, being one of the few non-Germans to receive such an honor. The dissolution of the Blue Division in December of 1943 marked Esteban-Infantes' return to Spain, where he continued to hold important military positions. He was appointed second in command of the High General Staff, then commander of the 62nd and 11th Divisions, and later promoted to Captain General of the 9th Military Region. Throughout his career, Esteban-Infantes also held crucial roles within the structure of the Francois government, serving as president of the Supreme Council of Military Justice and being appointed head of Francisco Franco's military house. His influence and proximity to the Francois regime made him a key figure in consolidating Franco's power in the post-war period. Although his career was marked by his victories in the Spanish Civil War and his participation in the Second World War, the transition to political life in post-war Spain was not without tensions. In 1951, he was promoted to Lieutenant General, a rank that further consolidated his prestige within the army. Over the following years, he held important positions within Franco's military apparatus, always focused on maintaining internal stability and loyalty to the regime. Throughout his career, Emilio Esteban-Infantes received numerous distinctions, including 2 individual military medals and various decorations for his participation in the Morocco campaign, the Crusade, and the Russian campaign. He was also internationally recognized, being made a Knight of the French Legion of Honor and receiving decorations from Portugal, Iran, and Lebanon. Additionally, he was awarded the Medal of the Coronation of the Queen of England, a symbol of his importance within the European military sphere. Esteban-Infantes, like many other military leaders who served under Franco, became an emblematic figure of Francois' Spain. Although his relationship with the Nazis and his leadership of the Blue Division placed him in a controversial position in the history of Spain, his skill and dedication as a military officer ensured him a prominent place in the country's military history. In 1962, Esteban-Infantes retired, marking the end of his active career in the army. However, his legacy endured as a testimony to his loyalty to Franco and his contribution to the regime during some of the darkest periods in the history of Spain. Despite his retirement, he continued to be a respected figure within the structure of the Francois government, holding honorary positions in his later years, such as Director of the Army Museum and President of the Higher Geographic Council. Emilio Esteban-Infantes died in 1962, leaving behind a legacy of bravery, controversy, and a remarkable military career that marked him as one of the most important officers of Francois' Spain, whose impact endured in both the history of the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War. His life and career reflect the complexity of a turbulent era, in which military, political, and ideological loyalties played a fundamental role in shaping the modern history of Spain.